actually it's a mistake to call constructivism a theory in the sense that offensive realism is a theory, because constructivism has many approaches within it. Some approaches tend to feel more positivist than not, and others feel more interpretive or hermeneutic. And so next Thursday's treatment is going to be on what has been called conventional constructivism. The first two chapters of Maya Zayfus's book are assigned, along with two substantial articles by the main conventional constructivist in IR theory, Alexander Wendt, who continues to teach and publish at The Ohio State University. And so he has been a dissertation advisor to many, many, many people in the constructivist field. And I would say that the two articles that are assigned, one is on the agency structure problem in international relations theory. That was written in the late 1980s when he was an assistant professor. And that sets up his 1992 article titled Anarchy is What States Make of It. And it's that second article that really made Alexander Wendt's career. And so one of the things you're going to have to be patient with when you're reading Alexander Wendt is because he's not writing in the same way that Mearsheimer writes. He's a lot more analytical. And because he's a lot more analytical, he approaches things in a very different way. And so I would encourage you to be patient as you're reading through it. And when you come across terminology you're not familiar with, take the extra minute to look up the term and write down the definition somewhere so that you begin to build something of a personal dictionary of these kinds of terms, because you're going to be running into these terms so many times that you actually really do need to know what these terms refer to. And make it as much of your ordinary academic conversations as you can. The more that you use the concepts, the more familiar you are with them, the less awkward it feels when you use the terms. So that's what's up for next week. Anyone have any questions before we proceed? No? Okay. Well, Rahul's paper is in Canvas files, so please call it up. And today we're looking for a paper that gives us an interpretive angle on Mearsheimer's last three chapters, the last of which is on China. And then there's two newspaper articles that are associated with China. And they aren't doing theory, obviously, but they would count as journalistic accounts that would either confirm or disconfirm what Mearsheimer has to say. And that's the interpretive angle we're hoping we can get in with those articles. So without any further ado, Rahul, whenever you're ready.
Good evening, everyone. I am Rahul, and today I'm going to present my panel 5. So here I begin. The study of international relations has always wrestled with two ways of understanding the world. One that explains state behavior through broad structural laws, and another that interprets it through human motives and perceptions. The first approach explanation sees the international system as a machine governed by impersonal forces such as power, capability, and geography. The second understanding looks inward towards belief, culture, and leadership psychology. Over the several decades, explanation has dominated the field through the rise of realism, particularly John Mearsheimer's theory of offensive realism. This perspective argues that the international system, which lacks a central authority, forces states to pursue power relentlessly. Survival requires constant competition, not because leaders want conflict, but because the structure of the world leaves them no other rational choice. This essay interprets China's rise through that realist lens. It seeks to answer a question: in a nuclear world, does the logic of power maximization still compel great powers like China to act aggressively, and does Asia's regional structure make war more likely? China's behavior, its military buildup, nuclear expansion, and lesson drawn from the Ukraine war confirms the structural compulsion of power maximization. Asia is evolving into what Mearsheimer calls an unbalanced multipolar system, the most war-prone structure in history, because maritime geography reduces the perceived cost of conventional war, and because Chinese nationalism fuels strategic ambition. A US-China conflict has become a serious structural possibility even in the shadow of nuclear deterrence. Offensive realism begins from a bleak but clarifying premise: anarchy forces states to seek dominance. Since no higher authority can protect them, states can never be sure of others' intention. Even if one power behaves peacefully today, it might not tomorrow. The safest option is to accumulate as much power as possible. Mearsheimer identifies several patterns in history that follows this structural logic. A world with two dominant rivals, what he calls bipolarity, is relatively stable because each side watches the other closely and the rules of competition are clear. But when there are three or more great powers, with one stronger than the rest, the system becomes unstable. This configuration, unbalanced multipolarity, creates powerful incentives for expansion and fear-driven alliance formation. Unbalanced multipolarity is by far the most war-prone and the deadly destruction of power. Thus, the strongest state seeks regional dominance, the others unite to stop it. The result is recurring catastrophic wars. Europe's Napoleonic First and Second World Wars all unfolded under this structure. Each saw one ambitious power, France or Germany, attempt to reorder its region, provoking a general conflict. Today, China occupies a similar structured position in Asia, the fastest rising state surrounded by anxious neighbor and a distant hegemon, the United States, committed to maintaining the regional balance. From the realist standpoint, China's rise does not reflect a new political ideology or unique leadership style, but a predictive structural response. As it grows wealthier and stronger, it must seek to secure its environment. To do that, it must push the United States out of Asia to establish itself as a dominant regional power and prevent the emergence of any peer competitor nearby. This pursuit is not optional, but it is built into the logic of survival from the lens of offensive realism. Structure does not exist in a vacuum. It interacts with geography to produce a specific pattern of competition. During the Cold War, Europe's geography imposed caution that the central front between NATO and Warsaw Pact ran through densely populated territory where any conventional clash risked immediate nuclear escalation. This made superpower war almost unthinkable. Asia, by contrast, is a maritime theater dotted with islands, choke points, and long supply lines. Most potential flashpoint, Taiwan, the South China Sea, the East China Sea are offshore. Conflicts at sea appear more containable and thus likely to trigger instant nuclear escalation. That perception makes limited war more thinkable. The geography of Asia therefore undermines the stabilizing fear that prevented war in Europe. Furthermore, Asia's regional system is fragmented and fluid. It includes multiple major powers like China, Japan, India, and the United States, plus smaller states balancing between them. No single alliance system defines the order. The result is precisely what Mearsheimer calls an unbalanced multipolar system, inherently more prone to miscalculation and conflict. Another destabilizing feature is nationalism. While the Cold War was shaped by ideological rivalry between communism and liberalism, the US-China contest is shaped by nationalist emotion. For China, especially under Xi Jinping, issues such as Taiwan, South China Sea, and the national rejuvenation are not just strategic, but they are sacred symbol of sovereignty and pride. This nationalism fuses with structural ambition, making compromise difficult and confrontation more likely. When structure and emotion aligns, as they now do in China's case, the risk of war rises sharply. Leaders convinced of their country's historical destiny may interpret even defensive action by rivals as existential threat. The result is combustible mix of fear and confidence, a perfect environment for the tragedy of great power politics to unfold. China's recent military and strategic decisions demonstrate that it is following the path predicted by offensive realism. Its moves are rational responses to structural pressures, not evidence of irrational aggression. Over the last decade, China has transformed its nuclear posture from minimal deterrence to rapid modernization. The Pentagon's annual report to Congress on China's military might estimate that China could have 700 deliverable nuclear warheads by 2027 and 1,000 3 years later. In addition, it warns that China has possibly already established a nascent nuclear triad with the development of nuclear-capable air-launched ballistic missile and improvement of its ground and sea-based nuclear capabilities. China is also experimenting with hypersonic glide vehicles capable of evading US missile defenses. When one such test shocked American military observer, it was described as Sputnik moment, signaling a new arms race. From a realist standpoint, these developments are not offensive whims but defensive imperatives. Beijing's leaders see their arsenal as insufficient relative to United States with more than 5,000 warheads and Russia over 6,000. In an anarchic world, quantitative inferiority translates into vulnerability. Expanding the nuclear force is therefore a logical attempt to achieve credible deterrence and regional autonomy. Mearsheimer's theory clarifies the deeper meaning. Nuclear weapons are tools in a broader quest for regional hegemony. China does not seek to conquer the world but to dominate its neighbor the same way the United States consolidated the Western Hemisphere under the Monroe Doctrine. Only by pushing external power out of its region can a state feel secure. China's analytical response to Russia's invasion of Ukraine provides further evidence of strategic learning under structural pressure. Chinese military thinkers have treated the conflict as a proving ground for understanding modern warfare. They identified Russia's failure in logistics and supplies as a critical weakness and are applying those lessons to potential future sea crossing and land seizure, language that unmistakably points to Taiwan. Chinese strategists also noted Ukraine's success in Starlink satellite networks to maritime battlefield communication and coordinate precision strikes. In response, Beijing has emphasized the need to develop its own low-orbit satellite system and create both soft-kill and hard-kill measures against enemy networks. Most revealingly, Chinese analysts concluded that the Russia's nuclear threats discourage direct US and NATO involvement. To them, this confirmed the deterrent value of a strong nuclear force in constraining American intervention. That perception directly supports the expansion of China's own strategic arsenal. Each of these moves suits the realist model perfectly. China is not acting impulsively or ideologically. It is rationally preparing for the structural demands of great power competition. The insight of realism is that even rational behavior can produce tragic outcomes. Each great power acting defensively makes the world more dangerous for everyone else. As China expands its military to feel secure, others, Japan, India, Australia, and the United States, respond with balancing coalition and military upgrades. The cycle feeds on itself. Mearsheimer calls this dynamic the tragedy of great power politics. It is tragic not because leaders are evil, but the structure of the system traps them in competition. Intention becomes irrelevant. The more China tries to secure itself, the more threatening it appears. The more others balance against it, the more insecure China feels. Unlike the relatively stable US-Soviet bipolar world, Asia's emerging multipolar environment lacks clear boundaries and mutual understanding. Its maritime geography and nationalist politics makes limited war seems feasible, increasing the risk that the small confrontation could spiral into larger conflict. In this sense, China's rise is not deviation but reaffirmation of realism's deepest truth. The search for security under anarchy inevitably produces insecurity. In conclusion, China's rise is the latest chapter in an old story. Every major power that achieved rapid growth had sooner or later collided with the established order. What makes the current moment distinctive is not China's ambition but the structural context surrounding it. An unbalanced multipolar system with high nationalism, ambiguous deterrence, maritime geography that invites limited conflict. Through the lens of Mearsheimer's offensive realism, China's behavior is entirely predictable. Its nuclear buildup, military modernization, and regional assertiveness are compelled responses to a world that rewards strength and punishes vulnerability. Yet each of these rational actions heightens fear among rivals and moves the system closer to war. The irony is that even if no side wants war, the structural itself generates the possibility of one. Anarchy allows no referee, and uncertainty admits no lasting trust. The same drive that gives states security also sows the seeds of instability. Asia today mirrors the structural dynamics that once engulfed Europe. Unless a stable balance emerges, the logic of power competition will continue to operate unchecked. The iron rule of realism endures. In an anarchic world, survival demands power, and the pursuit of power makes conflict ever more likely.
Thank you. Okay, now, when we get to the discussion, here is what I want us to begin to take steps into so that our discussions starting in panels 6 through 10 are kicked up a couple notches. You might have a bunch of questions in your mind that you would like to ask Rahul, but the purpose of our questions is to help him revise his rough draft so that he's doing an interpretive synopsis of the readings. So if you ask him a question about, well, what does he think China's going to do tomorrow? That's not a question about theory. That's not a question that's inviting any kind of interpretive synopsis. So when you look at his paper, I want you to think like Hollis and Smith. Pretend you're Hollis or Smith and frame a question from their viewpoint about Rahul's account in this paper that's trying to make interpretive sense of tonight's assigned readings. Okay? Let me give you 5 minutes to get that question or set of questions prepared. And Rahul, you can do the same thing. You can put together questions for us that would help you make more interpretive sense of all of this so that we can have that kind of a discussion. All right? I'll get back in touch with you in 5 minutes. Everybody ready with their questions? All right, Rahul, what questions do you have?
Oh, I have one question. So, okay, looking from the balance of power perspective in Asia, so China is a rising regional hegemon as it is portrayed, that it is contending the US, leadership of the world. So, my question is, how do Asia's geography and power distribution increases the war probability of conventional great power wars in a perspective that right now, currently, Russia and China seems to be like brother in arms, right? Which was due to which was due to the Ukraine-Russia war, because US had to support Ukraine, right? And seeing current scenario, for the concept of buck passing, we have two great powers, not great powers, but two rising powers, India and Russia near China. So my question is that, so looking at that current scenarios, Asia's geography, so US might want more allies in that area, like we have NATO in against the Warsaw Pact, right? The Central Front.
So I have two.
Sorry.
I have two answers.
Yes.
For your question. Answer number one is, if this is a question about the politics of international security in Asia, and you're asking this question only with the assumption that only offensive realism is valid for this question,
Yes.
then I would say the offensive realist answer is that a lot of it is going to depend upon decisions that the United States makes, Russia makes, China makes in the next few weeks that are very, very difficult to foresee.
Yes.
Okay, we do not know, and if we broaden that out and we say, we used to think that India and China were rivals,
Yes.
but now that is somewhat in question. But it's not altogether in question, because there are still points of conflict between India and China. But we also used to think that the United States and India were as close to allies as you could get without having a formal alliance. That is open to dispute now. And the same thing can be said with the United States and Vietnam. It used to be that the United States and Vietnam were very interested in balancing against China. But now Vietnam shows up at the big meeting that Xi Jinping had for Russia, North Korea, and some other country. India was there, Vietnam was there. So it depends. It also depends on who's president of the United States. President Trump doesn't seem to be the kind of person that wants multilateral arrangements. He doesn't seem to like multilateral alliances, and he certainly doesn't like multilateral institutions. But I don't see Europe abandoning them. And if Europe finds a way to get its act together, then we might find that not only is China a rising power, but so is the European Union, if. And if the European Union becomes a major power in its own right, contrary to Toja's assertion that it's a small power, then we would have, in one sense, at least a multipolar world where there's 4, maybe more, poles of power. So it's really hard to see the future in this confusing mess of a world that we've got right now. That's answer number 1. Answer number 2, why should we assume offensive realism is the theory that is the only theory that should address your question?
Yes.
Because then we have to figure out, Mearsheimer, towards the end of his book, says that offensive realism remains a crude instrument for explaining state behavior. Now, if it's a crude instrument, we can imagine offensive realism being something like a wrench when we need a hammer, or something like a serrated plastic knife when we need a hunting knife. It's a knife, it's a theory, but doesn't really do the job. Now, of course, Mearsheimer's going to say that it's going to do a better job. Offensive realism will do a better job than its competitors. We would expect him to say that, but he's also honest in admitting that it's a crude instrument. So my question to you that I don't want you to answer right now is, what is your interpretive thesis? What interpretation are you engaging with in these readings? It seems to me like you're not interpreting offensive realism. It seems to me that you're just applying it. I'm looking for you to interpret it. Tell us what it means that we don't already know. All right, Seth.
So you wrote that an unbalanced multipolar system inherently is more prone to miscalculation and conflict. You went into the conflict, but you didn't really talk about miscalculation. And I was wondering if you think that's a bureaucratic politics argument that Mearsheimer's making?
So the misunderstandings comes in buck passing theory. So when a state is acting aggressively, and we are in a multipolar world where we have few emerging powers. So one great power might think that it never will react and try to balance the rising hegemon, and the same country might think the other will do so. And like Germany, like France France thought that Germany would go eastward, and the whole mess was created just like that.
Okay, so essentially, if I'm understanding you correctly, you're saying it's not that the bureaucracy made the mistake in deciding to buck pass rather than balance. Ultimately, that's the decision of the head of state.
Yes.
The prime minister, the president, who national security establishment with the president, prime minister in place. That's the chief executive making that decision, and not lower bureaucracies.
No.
Okay. But then let me piggyback on your question and ask you this. Mearsheimer says that it would be rational for France to buck pass. Hope that Russia catches the buck. If they're wrong, is Mearsheimer incorrect that buck passing is rational? Can you be rational and mistaken at the same time?
Sorry, can you please repeat once?
Yes. So to be rational
Yeah.
is to pick the best, most efficient, most effective option to get to your interests.
Yes.
That's what it means to be rational.
Yes.
But Mearsheimer tells us that it's rational for states to pass the buck. And then he says, and sometimes buck passing fails because the other side either doesn't catch the buck or there's some other kind of miscalculation.
Yes.
Now, if I miscalculate in simple arithmetic, then I do something like 2 plus 2 is 5. That's a miscalculation. If he's going to call buck passing that doesn't work miscalculation, how can he call it rational?
That's a tough one.
Now, it's okay to say I'm not sure.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
Okay, but I want you to notice that's a question about theory, right? Because it's a question about the logical consistency of two separate theoretical claims that Mearsheimer is making. And if we want to assess whether or not offensive realism is a suitable theory, then we definitely want to get a picture as to whether the theoretical claims of offensive realism are logically consistent. And it doesn't seem like those two statements are. Would you agree?
Yes.
All right, thank you. Dylan?
I'm struggling to think of a question, but do you think, you mentioned the dichotomy between understanding and explanation in this, and do you think that explanation is a superior methodological approach to IR theory as opposed to understanding? And also, and then if you do, you explicitly are saying that you find OR theory useful, more so than others. And is there any, do you pick apart any like weaknesses in offensive realism as a theory? That's just my question.
Well, yes. So answering the first one, I do see from explanation point of view, offensive realism. Sorry, just a minute. So yes. So can you please repeat your first question?
Do you
Hmm.
think, just personally, do you think that explanation as a methodological approach
Oh,
is
yes.
better or has more merit than like understanding. And then from there, do you, within the taxonomy of explanatory theory, do you think that offensive realism is particularly a good theory? Like, do you see any weaknesses in it? Like, is there any, like, in the paper, I just don't see any, like potential, questioning. I don't know. Makes sense.
Yes, answering your first question, yes, explaining is a good methodology to explain this offensive realism, as both treats states as a black box, and sort of states are operating in a iron cage. I mean anarchy. So, and every state is a rational actor here. So we who are working relentlessly to maximize their security, and security just for the sake of survival. And so from that perspective, yes, explanation, I see explanation as a better methodology to explain, to understand the offensive realism. And well, answering your second question, I think personally I like offensive realism better than, like, I mean, I don't see the potential weakness in this theory, as just like as Hobbes said, we live under like brutish and cruel world, which the rising next superpower, China, is also showing, as it is not acting irrationally, and as the theory predicted, it is maximizing its security and trying to control its area, which offensive realism is explaining. From the perspective of offensive realism, it is going as it has predicted. So,
Okay. All right, thank you. Can I ask you a question that focuses on a different set of countries than China?
yes, of course.
Okay. Do you believe that the behavior of France today is something that offensive realism would predict or explain well?
Well, yes, I think because you see, the history of France, it is a colonist, right?
I'm
has
sorry?
So France has colonies still till date. I mean,
Not to my knowledge.
really, I'm so sorry.
I mean, they had colonies before, but to the best of my knowledge, all the French colonies have become independent, as have all the British colonies. I think that, now I could be wrong about this, but I think the last British colony that existed was Hong Kong, and that got turned over to China in 1987. I think every country in Africa that France or Britain claimed as a colony has long since become independent. Now, the United States has territories, but they don't consider them colonies, like Guam or Puerto Rico.
I heard it few years ago, so I thought, yeah. So okay, coming
Right.
back to the question.
I don't think there are any colonies in the world anymore in the old 19th century sense of that term,
Yeah.
which doesn't mean that there aren't areas of the world that aren't roundly dominated by countries that are stronger, you know, like Guam.
So in Western Hemisphere, like recently, France is very aggressive on selling its military technology, like its aircraft Rafale to India, because and not just India but all around the world, in Africa, in the war-prone nations. So I see it as its eye on the coming instability.
Okay,
And-
and in its relationship with the United States,
Yes.
do you think France is behaving like a great power or like a middling power?
So from my perspective, and seeing from US perspective, it is actually trying to be in Europe. It's trying to act as a leader in terms of like gaining wealth through military, this military industrial complex, you know.
So does it see the United States as an ally, or does it see the United States as a competitor?
It sees US as ally, of course, not as a competitor. Not just France, but I saw news recently that even Germany is again stacking up its military and doing military exercise in that area. So it is a hint that there is going some power struggles, maybe because of Ukraine-Russia war, as President Donald Trump today said that he will meet Vladimir Putin soon to talk about peace in that area. But coming back to that question, I see that there is going in that area. There is like few from security point of view. There is going something. Something is the military. I didn't know how to put it, but what I mean to say is that they are maximizing their security, seeing the potential maybe chaos.
Okay, thank you. Isabel?
So you brought up the understanding and explaining in the beginning, and then you didn't really weave it through.
Yeah.
So would you say that China is like kind of very closely following the rule book of offensive realism, or does it just so happen to be behaving in the way that offensive realism predicts?
Well, I think China is of course following the rule book, not because it wants to, but the anarchic system forces it to do so. Like as the book says, it outlines the theory that unbalanced multipolarity is most war-prone structure, and using historical examples like Napoleonic and Nazi eras to prove its claim, and also the news summaries claim that China is closely studying Russia-Ukraine war. I don't think it is playing by the rule book, but the anarchic system itself is forcing it to secure itself for its survival, and to gain and not just to compete the US, but for the sake of their survival, they are acting as a rational actor. That would be my answer.
All right. Any follow-up questions from anyone? Okay, then let me reiterate my main question to you. What interpretive thesis do you have on offensive realism? So when I look at your thesis, I find it on page 1 in the second paragraph. At least this is what I think your thesis is. You write, this essay interprets China's rise through a realist lens. Now you use the word interprets, but notice the structure of the sentence. The essay interprets China's rise. I'm looking for you to interpret offensive realism. Do you see the difference?
Yes.
So when you say you're interpreting China's rise through the realist lens, I'd say what it turns out is that you're looking at what Mearsheimer and maybe some other people like Zhang last week had to say about China. And you're going, yeah, that seems right to me. And then you look in the newspaper articles and you go, oh, look, the newspaper articles also think that Mearsheimer's take on it is right. And so what this then cashes out to is this essay summarizes offensive realism on China. And then you continue to write, it seeks to answer the question, in a nuclear world, does the logic of power maximization still compel great powers like China to act aggressively? And does Asia's regional structure make war more likely? Now, do you see how that question is not about offensive realism?
Yes.
So, what question do you want to ask about offensive realism? Now, you may not know what that question is right now, but here's the thing that you need to think about. Is there something about offensive realism that you haven't yet figured out? Is there something about offensive realism that's confusing? If there is, then put a question in a way that can help you come up with a thesis that answers the confusion or the puzzle. But let's say you don't have any questions about offensive realism itself. You go, it's a pretty simple theory. I understand what the anarchy principle is all about. I understand what power maximization is all about. I understand all these other theoretical elements like balancing or buck passing. They're pretty straightforward. Then you might ask yourself, can you think of any clear counterexamples to offensive realism? Cases that offensive realism just can't explain, and why not? And here would be the basis for that. It comes out of Hollis and Smith, and I think, yeah, this is chapter 3, so you might want to make a note of this so you can go back and read it. So you might remember this diagram on page 51 that talks about the way a theory of explanation proceeds, starting with definitions and hypotheses, a process of logical deduction, making predictions, and then a process of empirical observation. Okay, so here's an possible interpretive question. Does Mearsheimer follow this diagram? And if he does, how closely does he follow it when it gets to step 6? And are there any instances in which, when he gets to step 6, he is faced with the fact that his theory doesn't explain the case, and then what does he do? Which direction does he go in the case that the theory doesn't actually fit very well? All right, here's another possibility. All right, page 53. I'll read this one paragraph. It's the first full paragraph on page 53. Hollis and Smith write, on the logic of validation itself, Karl Popper makes the striking proposal that what counts for explanatory theory is not confirmation of the theory, but its falsification. It is easy to suppose that it must be good news for a theory when experience confirms it. Now, I'll pause and say, Mearsheimer's got this big old smile on his face when he's done with the history chapters, because he says, look, history confirms my theory. And then he has a big smile on his face at the end of chapter 10. Look, recent history in China confirms my theory. And Hollis and Smith say, yeah, but Karl Popper has criticism. And here's the criticism. What counts is not confirmation, but falsification. It's easy to suppose it must be good news for a theory when experience confirms it. Not at all, says Popper, citing the examples of Karl Marx and Sigmund Freud. A Marxist or a Freudian theory is so constructed that experience is sure to confirm it. But this is no merit. Far from being models of scientific progress, such theories are not properly scientific at all. Is offensive realism a scientific theory? If it is, then we should know counter cases, and we should know what would count as falsifying the theory altogether. So here, that's another interpretive question you might want to ask is offensive realism a scientific theory? And you can say, here's where the theory is confirmed, but that doesn't make it a scientific theory. What makes it a scientific theory is we know exactly what would make it false. And then we can actually see it in history. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So that's what I urge you to think about when you're trying to come up with an interpretive question for Mearsheimer chapter 8, 9, and 10, and then these newspaper articles, is I'm not entirely convinced offensive realism has proved anything. I think it explains some cases. How many cases it doesn't explain, that's a matter of further research. All right, before we take a break, any questions for me before we move on to other things? Yes?
So you're saying that, like, it's hard to use the rational this calculation, but doesn't that just mean that the rational actor had imperfect knowledge?
That's a fair response, because a rational actor, presumably when they're doing simple arithmetic, has perfect knowledge, right? They understand what the numbers are all about. They understand what the mathematical operations are all about. And so miscalculating on 2 + 2 = 5, you really have to be pretty ignorant of mathematics to make that mistake. But yeah, in a complicated scenario like what we see with the security dilemma and security competition among great powers, yeah, it with limited, imperfect information, you make the best choice that you can, and it's rational insofar as if your assumptions are working and you've got enough information, this should take you to realizing your interests. So that's the right response for that. Anything else? Okay, I'll see all of you at 7:45. Yeah. I think we've interpreted the heck out of offensive realism, and there's not really that much more to say about it, at least at this point. We will have more than ample opportunity to come back and use other viewpoints to interpret offensive realism once we get into the constructivist material and into the ontological security material. But this is an exercise to test your knowledge of offensive realism and see whether you can apply it the way John Mearsheimer hopes policymakers would. Does this game board look familiar to you?
I was thinking like Risk.
Well, it resembles Risk except in this way. The game is not played with one or two dice. It's all based on how you think strategically. Now, this game is designed for 7 individual players. When I play this with undergraduates, I divide them into teams because I've got classes that are much larger than 7. And so we have 7 teams, and one team is England, and the other is France, and then there's Italy and Russia and Germany and Austria and Turkey. We have 7 enrolled in our class, and where the hell are the other people? Okay, well, they're, and sorry? Hope is sick. Okay, so barring the fact that we can't assemble 7 teams, this is a map of pre-World War I Europe. And you'll remember that Mearsheimer devoted a section of his book to trying to figure out how offensive realism explained World War I's causes and the outcomes. Okay, and of course it sets it up for World War II. So, with 4 people, it seems reasonable to me that we need to try and mirror some of the reality. So, 3 of you are going to get 2 countries, and 1 of you is going to get 1. And you are baptized as Germany and Austria. So Germany is black and Austria is red.
I'm a colorblind.
Sorry?
I'm colorblind. So I'm assuming there's like red and green on there.
Well, you are black and red because green is Italy. And speaking of Italy, you are Italy and Russia. Russia is white and Italy is green. You are England and France. You are Turkey, or as it was known back in the day, the Ottoman Empire. Okay, now when I play this with undergraduates, I actually make them engage in diplomacy. But it also takes 3 to 4 class sessions to play this out if we have the diplomacy. So there's another variation of this game in which there's no diplomacy at all. It's just each country writes the orders for their units, and the objective is for one country or one alliance to get 18 of the 34 dots on the board. We call these supply centers. The starting positions for England is Fleet London, Army Liverpool, and Army Edinburgh. France, Fleet Brest, Army Paris, Army Marseille. Germany, Fleet Kiel, Army Berlin, Army Munich. Austria, Army Budapest, Army Vienna, Fleet Trieste. Italy, Fleet Army Venice, Army Rome, Fleet Naples. Russia, Army Warsaw, Fleet St. Petersburg, South Coast, Army Moscow, Fleet Sevastopol. Turkey, Army Smyrna, Army Constantinople, Fleet Ankara. Now this is a very simplified version of a war game because there are no air units, and each army cannot subdivide, each fleet cannot subdivide. So if you move a fleet, you're moving the entire fleet. There's really only a couple things that you need to know about the dynamics of the movements. Obviously, armies cannot move into water bodies, but fleets can. And the rules permit a fleet to move along the coastline in one turn. The simple rule is this: you can only order your unit, and you can order your 3 units if you've got 3 units, but you have to write an order for each unit independently of the others, and they can only move 1 space at a time. And by 1 space, I mean they can only move into a next door space. A next door space. So for instance, Fleet Brest can go to the English Channel, Gascony, or the Mid-Atlantic. It cannot go to Spain in one turn. So if an order is written Fleet Brest to Spain, it doesn't go through. It's also true for armies. Paris can go to Burgundy, Picardy, Brest, or Gascony in one turn. It takes 2 turns to get to Belgium. Another thing, each territory or water body can only be occupied by 1 unit at a time. This is where it's different than Risk, because in Risk you can have more than 1 unit in a space. But not in this game. In this game, only 1 unit in 1 space. All right? Now, if you decide that you want to attack someone, you probably are going to need the force of numbers. And that means you would have to pick which unit you wanted to do the attacking. And then other units can support the attack only if they can get into that same territory themselves. So the test of your ability to think strategically in offensive realism is your ability to think through the tactics that you would have to have. What is your goal? Right? What does Mearsheimer say every great power's goal is? Hegemony, right? That means control 18 centers. And you might have to cooperate with others in order to get the advantage, but at some point you might find yourself betraying an alliance. I just want to take a couple more minutes to say how I'm looking for your orders to be written. So like, In your case, Rahul, since you only have Turkey, you're only writing orders for the yellow units. So let's say, and I'm not saying you want to do this, but let's say you wanted to move your fleet from Ankara to Armenia. You could do that. And this is the way that the order would be written. You put the F for fleet. You put the first 3 letters of the name, Ankara, to Armenia. That tells us that fleet is going to Armenia. All right? Once it enters Armenia, it's no longer Fleet Ankara anymore. It's now Fleet Armenia. So the names of the units change depending upon where they are. But they remain yours. Okay? Now, you might say, if you're England, well, I'd really like to have this army somewhere on the continent. Well, before you can get that army on the continent, you have to get a fleet into the sea, and then you can convoy it. That takes 2 turns. 1 turn to get the fleet into the sea, and the second turn to convoy the army. So if you're England, in the first turn, you might say Fleet London to the North Sea. That's turn 1. Then turn 2. Army, Edinburgh. Actually, that should be a fleet. So let me switch that out here real quick. So let's say you order Army Liverpool to Yorkshire. Boom. That's turn 1. Turn 2, now it's Army Yorkshire because it's in a different place. Convoy to Norway via Fleet North Sea. Boom, boom, boom. Now, at the point where it makes sense to talk about attacking, we'll pause and I'll show you how to write orders for supporting an attack on some location. But so far, this is the way orders would be written. You name the unit, you say where it needs to go. You name the unit, say where it needs to go, name the unit, say where it needs to go, name the unit, say how it's going to get to the place that it needs to go. So far, so good? Okay, questions? If there's no questions, then we're going to make these rounds awfully short. So on your paper, here's how I'd like for you to have your paper set up, because you're going to be giving me these papers over and over and over again. We're just going to be, you'll give them to me, I'll give them back to you, you'll give them to me, I'll give them back to you. Put the name or the names of your countries right up here. Then devote a small column on the left-hand side to the season, and leave the majority of the right-hand side of the paper wide open for orders. And 3 of you have 2 countries to write orders for, so that would mean that you would want to be clear about which country you're dealing with in the set of orders that you've got. So we're going to start with spring 1910. Now, you're not talking with each other. It's a little bit like playing chess. You're just trying to figure out what are the best moves for you to make to get what you believe is your national interest. And if you want to cooperate with someone else, figure out how to signal that in the orders you give. Yes.
Can you ferry an army?
Well, that's what a convoy is.
Okay, just double check.
Yeah, that's what a convoy is. Your word ferry is the way the game describes a convoy. All right, so we're going to put that back here. So England, Fleet Edinburgh, Army Liverpool, Fleet London. That's what you're starting with. Okay? It's going to be almost 8 o'clock. So I'm going to give you a little bit of extra time for the first round because this is the first time you're doing it. I'm going to collect your orders at or before 8:10. That gives you 10 minutes. If you're done with your orders ahead of time, then just go ahead and give them to me. But for each of your units, give it something to do. And in some cases, that would be stay in place. So then you name your unit and you say hold.
How many turns are there?
You don't know how many turns we're going to have. Remember the game theory simulation we had? You don't know how many turns we're going to have.
No, but like for this, like I can, like for that example, I can do the first one.
Yeah, you're only writing one order for each unit at this point. You're wanting to set yourself up for the next season, which is going to be fall 1910. Dodgers won again. Yes. Marseille, M-A-R. All right, whenever you're ready to give them to me, you can give them to me. This is a fleet. You have an army in Liverpool, but this is a fleet over here in Edinburgh. Okay, now I'm gonna read all of the orders, and then all the orders get carried out simultaneously. Sometimes orders don't work out, and I'll explain how all that goes to you as we go along. So I'll first read Turkey's orders. Now you have Army Constantinople to Bulgaria. I'm going to put it here on the border. Army Bulgaria to Serbia. Now here's the problem, is that you're asking this army to do more than one thing at a time. So you can only move the thing one space at a time. You can't move it 2 spaces at a time or more. That was found in this explanation that I had about Fleet London. Fleet London can go to the North Sea if it wants to in one turn, but it can't go to Norway in one turn. It has to take 2 turns to get there. So Bulgaria, then you say Army Smyrna to Constantinople, and you don't have anything for Fleet Ankara. You want it to stay there?
Yes.
Okay, so we're gonna put this army in Bulgaria, but it can't do anything else. It can't go to Serbia right away. Now, here's the other thing, is because I've read this order out loud, now everybody knows what you intended, okay? And that's a function of when your actions actually are communication devices. All right? So, Russia and Italy. Is this Moscow?
Moscow, yeah, it's just in Cyrillic.
Okay. All right. Well, it is funny, but I didn't know where it was. Army Moscow to the south coast of St. Petersburg.
Mhm.
All right, that means, okay, so when you say Fleet south coast of St. Petersburg, stay in place, you're asking 2 units to occupy the same territory at the same time, and that can't happen in this game.
Okay.
That was what we were talking about over here, is only one piece in a territory at a time, so this forces Moscow to stay in place. You want Warsaw to stay in place. You want Sevastopol to stay in place. Interesting.
Right, so for like attacking, if you can't do 2 people at the same place, like how would this work?
We'll get to that in a minute. Now, Army Rome to Tuscany, Fleet Naples to Rome, Venice stay in place. Okay, very interesting. Germany. Army Vienna to Bohemia. Army Budapest hold, Fleet Trieste hold. Army Berlin to Silesia. Army Munich hold, Fleet Kiel hold. All right. Army Paris to Burgundy. Fleet Brest to the English Channel. Army Marseille hold. Fleet London to the North Sea. Army Liverpool to Yorkshire. Fleet Edinburgh hold. All right, now you have to decide, what does all this mean for you and your national interest? And John Mearsheimer would like to ask you, have you picked the optimal, the most rational choices? Could you have afforded to be more offensive, especially since the best defense is a good offense? And what would that look like for you? Now, in the fall round, if you occupy an empty center, any place that isn't currently occupied by a unit, and it has one of these dots on them, it's a supply center, then you might be able to build up your fleet and or army. So, for instance, I'm just going to pick on Italy. Had Italy decided to go Naples to the Tyrrhenian Sea, and then in the next turn go to Tunis, it would have captured Tunis, and that would have enabled it to build a new unit. Now, could it build a new unit just anywhere? No, you're limited to your 3 home supply centers, because that's where your industrial production is. You don't have industrial production outside of your national borders. So your aim is to capture as many of these dots as you can. Some of them are neutral territories, and you can just pick them up. Others you have to fight for. Turkey, Russia, Italy, Germany, Austria, England, France. Okay, write down fall 1910, and now, 5 minutes, give me your orders at 8:17 or earlier, and I'll read them off, and then we'll figure out if you can build anything.
Would that be one move for you?
Yes. Thank you. Thank you. Yes. Yeah, so if you tell a fleet to convoy and then tell it to go someplace at the same time, that would cancel both orders. All right, thank you. Let's see what you folks have come up with. So for Germany, Austria, fleet Kiel to Denmark. I'm gonna put it over here on the border, because even though I suspect North Sea is gonna be convoying something, it's possible that Denmark would be contested. All right, Army Silesia hold, Army Munich hold. Fascinating. Absolutely fascinating. Fleet Trieste hold. Fascinating. Absolutely fascinating. Budapest to Romania. Ooh. Ooh. We'll have to see what Turkey thinks about that. Bohemia hold. All right, speaking of Turkey. Bulgaria to Romania. All right, now, when two armies are contesting the same territory, it's a stalemate in the game. So they bounce back to their original positions. In this situation, it could have been that Fleet Sevastopol could have supported either Army Bulgaria into Romania or Army Budapest into Romania, but that would require an alliance with Russia. That would require Russia to write an order to that effect. And let's say it supported Budapest into Romania. Well, that's a 2-to-1 advantage, and so that's the numerical advantage against a territory when the territory is contested. And so an order would have to look something like this. It would have to be separate orders. Army Budapest to Romania, Fleet Sevastopol support Army Budapest to Romania. That's how the order would have to look. In order, and if this order was written like this, and Army Budapest went someplace else, then obviously that support order would fail. All right, so Bulgaria tried for Romania, didn't get it. Fleet Ankara hold. Interesting. Really interesting. Constantinople to Bulgaria. Sorry, that can't work. All right. Fleet South Coast to the Gulf of Bothnia. Good.
I'm sorry.
Yes.
Did y'all find any keys in here by any chance?
I'm sorry?
Did you find any keys in here by any chance?
I did not find any keys. But if you want to look around, go ahead.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, you bet. Army Warsaw to Prussia. Oh, the Russians just attacked Germany. Oh, that's a weird thing. Let's see. Army Moscow, Warsaw. Army's Fleet Sevastopol hold. Fascinating. No one wants the Black Sea? Okay. Fleet Rome to the Tyrrhenian Sea. Army Army Tuscany to Piedmont. All right, we don't know what Marseille wants to do, so I'm going to put it right here. Army Venice hold. Army Burgundy to Belgium. Bingo, there it is. Fleet Brest, well, there is no more Fleet Brest, it's Fleet English Channel. Okay, but you want it to hold, it's gonna hold anyway. Army Marseille hold, okay. Well, now the Italians are knocking on your door. Army, okay, you've got this order written backwards. The Army can't convoy. The fleet can convoy. But I get what you're trying to say. You want Army Yorkshire to use Fleet North Sea to go to Norway. Fleet Edinburgh hold. Fascinating. Absolutely fascinating. Okay. Now, let's see who gets to build and who does not. So, we're going to go to Germany first. Germany gets Denmark. And Germany can build one. And you can build a unit on Berlin or Kiel. And in either place, because Berlin is a coastal territory here, and so is Kiel, it can either be an army or a fleet. So what do you want and where do you want it?
I'll do it. Army in Berlin.
Army, Berlin. Now let's take a look and see if Austria. Okay, see, so this is fascinating. Serbia was there for the taking from Budapest. And so that means Austria doesn't get to build anything. So at this point, Germany has 4 and Austria has 3, and that's a total of 7. All right? Now, all this intelligence is coming to you through these intel sources. So take it in, make sense of it. Turkey, did you take anything? Yes, you did. You took Bulgaria and you held it. So you can build a unit on Smyrna, and it can either be a fleet or it can be an army. What do you want?
I want to
You want an army. Fascinating. Army Smyrna. You've got 4 right now. Russia, did you capture anything? No, you didn't capture anything that had a supply center. So Russia can't build. Did Italy capture anything? No, Italy can't build. So Russia still has 4, and Italy still has 3. England, did you get? Yes, so you can build a unit on either Liverpool or London, fleet or army. What do you want? Army in Liverpool. And France can build one because it took Belgium. So you can build on either Paris or Brest. What do you want? Well, you're gonna have to have an army in Paris then, okay? And that means England has 4 and France has 4. And that means there is a modest advantage showing up on the board. A modest advantage. All right, consult the John Mearsheimer in your head about what you ought to do next for power maximization. And we are moving now into spring 1911, and I will collect your orders on or before 8:30. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. All right. Gulf of Bothnia to Sweden. I'm going to put that on the border because it's possible Norway may try and get it too. Prussia hold, Warsaw hold. Sevastopol to the Black Sea. Fleet Tyrrhenian to Tunis. Piedmont hold, Venice hold. Bulgaria to Serbia. Constantinople to Bulgaria. Smyrna to Constantinople. Ankara hold, interesting. Russia gets the Black Sea. Now you also say Constantinople to Romania, and here's the problem. Remember that order? You can't have one unit do two things at the same time. So Constantinople goes to Bulgaria, but we need to find out, we need to read Austria's orders to find out if any of these things succeed. I'm gonna hold on to that in a minute. All right, let's see what Germany orders. Army Berlin hold, Army Silesia hold. So Berlin and Silesia are holding. Fleet Denmark to the Baltic Sea. That means Russia gets Sweden. Trieste holds, Budapest to Romania. Turkey gets Serbia, Constantinople goes to Bulgaria, Smyrna goes to Constantinople, Bohemia hold Munich to Kiel. All right. Paris to Burgundy. Belgium hold. Fleet English Channel hold. Fascinating. Fleet Edinburgh to the North Sea, except there's already a fleet in the North Sea. Oh, you meant that? Okay. Army Liverpool convoy to Holland via Fleet North Sea. You can't do that from Liverpool. You have to do that from one of the coastal territories that's immediately next to the North Sea. Okay, there it is. Now, we don't build anything in the spring round, we only build it in the fall round. So that means if you want to build something and you occupy it in the spring, you have to hold it in the fall. If you move out of it in the fall, you haven't held it. Russia, Italy, Germany, Austria, Turkey, Britain, France. Okay. Fall 1911.
I hold it, do you mean there needs to be like a unit on it?
Your unit needs to be there. You're on the reverse side of the page now. Just remind me your country's name at the top. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Okay. Russia and Italy. Fleet Sweden hold. Army Prussia to Livonia. Ah, the Russians are retreating, as it were. Warsaw hold, Black Sea hold, Tunis hold, Piedmont hold, Venice hold. Turkey. Army Serbia to Budapest. Ah, the Turks decided to attack the Austrians. World War I has begun. Fleet Ankara hold. Army Budapest. Okay, so I see a habit in your orders. You have a unit that comes and then you ask the unit to do a second thing. So it can only go to Budapest, it can't do a second thing. And you're also not telling any other units to do anything, so by definition, that means you're asking them to hold. Okay. Okay, Army Burgundy to Munich. The French have attacked the Germans. So now the Austrians have been attacked and the Germans have been attacked. Army Marseille hold. Army Belgium hold. Fleet English Channel hold. Army Liverpool to Yorkshire. Army Norway hold. Everything else hold. Okay? Let's see what happens now. Fleet Baltic hold. You've got everything holding, I think. Except for Army Kiel to Holland.
I didn't know if I had to specify build on.
Well, it's too early to talk about building, but that looks like that's your only motion order, is that right? Okay. Okay, now we've captured everything. Well, the French have just occupied Munich, and the Turks have just occupied Budapest. Now, after we decide on the build decision, and if you lose territories, you actually have to destroy units. You can only have as many units on the board as you have these supply centers in your possession. So after we decide on that, I'm going to give you a 10-minute period of diplomacy where you can move off and you can choose to talk to someone, or you can choose not to talk to someone. You can talk to everybody. You can talk to two people. You can talk to one person only. You can play chess on your phone. You can do whatever you want for 10 minutes. But then you come back and we're back into this silent round of order. Okay? So, Russia, did you occupy anything new? You did move into Sweden in the previous turn, and you held it. So you get to build one, Russia gets to build one. And you can build on either St. Petersburg, Moscow, or Sevastopol. What do you want?
I want to build an army on Sevastopol. Reinforcement.
Okay, now, if you're also Italy, so you've occupied Tunis, and you can build one. What do you want?
Can I do a navy in the Gulf of Leon?
No, you have to have it in port.
Okay. So import here.
You can be in port in Naples or Rome.
We'll do Rome.
Rome. Fleet Rome. So as of right now, Russia has 5 and Italy has 4, and that's 9. Austria, did you take anything? You did take Romania. Good for you. Guess what? Budapest was taken away from you. So Austria cannot build. Austria, no builds. Germany, did you take, well, you kept Denmark, obviously, and you took Holland, good for you, but France took Munich, no builds. So that means Germany remains at 4, and Austria remains at 3, which is 7. So Russia, Italy has 9, Germany, Austria has 7, Turkey. You took Serbia in the spring, but you didn't hold it. You did take Budapest and you held that, so you gain 1. You can build 1. What do you want?
I was sorry there. Can I?
You can't build in Serbia, you can only build on Smyrna.
Okay, yes, I'll do that.
What do you want?
I want
Fleet or an army?
the army.
Really?
Yes.
You've got the Aegean Sea, you've got all this stuff, you could, okay, army. Because Turkey's not just a land power. All right, so now Turkey has 5. And that means if we just think about countries in their own singularity, Russia and Turkey are now tied. England. Well, you have Norway. And that's all you've taken. So England doesn't build. England, no builds. But France, by God, has taken Munich. So France gets to build. Okay, what do you want? You can build on Paris or Brest?
I'll take it on.
Army in Paris. Okay, now that means that England has 4 and France has 5. So we have France with 5, Russia with 5, Turkey with 5, and all the other countries have fewer than 5. It is 8:44. Go over there and talk with each other about what you might think of doing in a Mearsheimian kind of way to affect outcomes. Here's where diplomacy comes in.
You're about to create a mustached man. Yeah, you look too happy. That's pretty crazy. What? Do you want to formalize it? Yeah, Molotov, Ribbentrop, not, yeah, sure. Germany's never done anything bad against Russia.
Yeah, no treaty in the past never failed.
Well, it hasn't, from the fall of 9/11.
I don't think there's any treaties there.
If you need, I mean, I told you to go over there, but that doesn't mean you have to stay over there. If your negotiations are better done by looking at the map, come on back and do that.
Because I'm in a two front war. So me and you made an alliance. You can make it a one front war by sweeping out of Turkey.
Well, no, because he's already there.
Well, I can contain it.
Can you?
You can.
If I support them, you can contain them?
I mean, you're nowhere near Turkey.
But she's.
But I'm close to Russia.
So Rahul, what we're doing here.
And I'm literally in your. country.
Rahul, we're trying to figure out balancing versus bypassing here, right?
Very neat. Then that puts an army against the UK right there. If I.
But that's okay. Who's red? You're red.
You take this one.
No, you can't. I can take one.
I already took Denmark. I built one. You did.
No.
I took Denmark after I built one.
So then you don't have any right now, though.
Once you are finished with diplomacy, you can just sit down and start writing orders for spring 1902.
I feel you already did what you told me. Very good Denmark. Yeah, that's like the best bit. But we're gonna make a stalemate, she's gonna try to take Denmark. Cool, that's still like that.
Russia, you were one alliance and you just gave them one. Saying. Come on, he's super weak. Easy money.
Yeah, but if he forms an alliance with Turkey, that puts me in a precarious situation. It's easier, it'd be better for me to just, ally with him, to be honest. Because I'm pretty exposed down here. And I'm definitely pretty exposed up here to him and to you. But, I don't know.
But down here, you're exposed to me.
Not
So
really,
if
where's your
we-
Navy down here?
Well, it can be there if I wanted to.
Yeah, well, we'll see about that.
You got a coin? You wanna do the coin flip? Coin flip diplomacy?
That weird shit you live in that one?
I think we'll go for multiple person contact.
No, this. Can you move through the street?
Can who move through the strait? Well, Fleet Ankara can move to Constantinople, and then from Constantinople can go to the Aegean Sea. But, as Rahul is correctly saying, there are risks involved.
If I continue to hold Romania, would I get one next spring?
No, because you actually have to account for the loss of Budapest and the loss of Munich. You would have been able to build had you not lost Budapest. And you would have been able to build had you not lost Munich. Okay, let's resume our order writing, and I will collect orders at 8:58. For spring 1902. If you're using the reverse side of your paper, make sure that you put the names of your country or countries at the top. Thank you.
Oh, sorry. I think I forgot.
Thank you. I'm sorry.
Next is Spain.
This is Portugal,
I don't know.
Spain,
North Africa.
North Africa,
I don't know.
Gascony. Okay. Army Bulgaria to Serbia. Army Constantinople, Bulgaria. Army Smyrna to Constantinople. And Fleet Anchor Hold. And since nothing about Budapest, we're assuming Budapest is holding. All right. For Russian Italy, Army Livonia, ferry to Denmark. All right. Now, there's nothing in the